All right, welcome back to YouTube. This is Tim Cain. Does more dev time mean a better game? I don't know, ask Star Citizen.
Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about, does more
Hey, Tim.
dev time mean a better game?
No, not really. Not
This is a
always.
question from T4NU1 who asked, hey Tim, there's been a myth going around for ages that more development time equals a better product. Is that myth true? Also, what can't be fixed with more development time?
It's a great question. I think that there's diminishing returns. Um, what else can you put in your game? If your game has every single feature, all the content, then at some point it's not going to feel like it has its own identity at that point, right? So, no, I think that in many cases, a little bit more dev time never hurts a game. But there's a point where you're just going to be like, okay, what can we actually work on? The game already has 100 hours of gameplay. Players don't want another 100. The players don't want the narrative, the story to be doubled in length because then it becomes too long, right? It's like Alien Isolation is a great game that many people say is just too long. What would more dev time have been? And arguably, the more dev time could have been just cutting out the content that was fluff, right? So,
Yes. This ancient myth about more development time. I believe it's from Mesopotamia, 6 or 8,000 years ago. But before I talk, I should read a book.
okay.
These are difficult questions. I'm going to take each one separately, but they kind of lead into each other. First of all, does more development time lead to a better game? Does it mean you're going to get a better game out of it? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that there are a lot of games out there that ship way too early.
Yes.
And then they fail because their features
Bugs
aren't finished.
missing.
They're incomplete. There's a lot of
Performance
bugs,
issues.
especially crash bugs.
Yeah.
It's unoptimized, and I mean, there are literally people who are like, this game went below 30 frames per second. I can't play it. So, all three of those things, unfinished features, bugs,
Could benefit from more time.
not just crash bugs, but bugs, and lack of optimization, will make people not buy your game.
Yep.
And I'll talk about that at the end.
Or write bad reviews, which will hurt the Steam algorithm, and it spirals into the same things that people won't buy your game. But there's a lot of things that where even if you do everything right, but you have some performance problems, bad reviews. I mean, look at exactly as we were checking out before. Clair Obscure has some performance problems for people, especially on like AMD cards. It's getting bad reviews. That's not about the game. You go down to the reviews, and these negative reviews are not about. I filtered, by the way, just to be fair, so that's why you see only negative here. But these reviews are not necessarily about the game itself. It's just game seems great so far, but there's a bug. Once it's fixed, crashes, FOV problem. It's just these are going to be fixed, right? And I hope that these people will change the review if they get fixed, but some people won't, and that will stay in the game. So the more stable a release you can have, the better that you're going to, have the game being received. And of course, that then means people will look at your game and want to buy it. So yeah, more time is a big boon, especially when you're doing polishing and quality of life and bug fixing at the end of a dev cycle.
Not buy your game. And I'll talk about that at the end, about what you can do about that. But I'll tell you right now, I will put all of Troika's games into this category. I've said before, I feel like we shipped all three of Troika's games in the alpha stage. If you're wondering what I mean by that, I have a game production stage video. I'll link it below.
I feel that Train Life, the game that I worked on, was also shipped in alpha stage due to horrendous production and lack of definition of what those milestones mean, which is, I think, kind of maybe more the problem, or I don't know. It's if you don't know that you're doing something wrong, where can you really point the finger at, right? You learn you were ignorant, you learn you made some mistakes. But if you just willingly do not have definitions because you know that you're not going to meet those definitions of what that stage means, you're kind of admitting that you don't care about what is you're actually making. You just care about surpassing the milestone in order to make money, and that is very dangerous.
I was always jealous. For my entire career, I've been jealous of people who work at companies that have war chests. And by war chest, I mean they have a lot of money, probably from previous successful games, and they could basically fund their games themselves.
Yeah, and they could just say, okay, our game's not ready, so another 6 months of development. No problem. We'll shift the release date. So lucky.
Until they were ready to,
Yep.
until they were done, until they thought, the developers themselves said this game is done. Unlike most of the rest of
It's a
us,
dream.
where we are beholden to publishers who basically, at some point, usually when the money runs out or shortly thereafter, they just pull the ripcord and game goes up on the shelves. And many times I think they figure, well, if this one doesn't do well, we're a publisher, we've got a dozen others coming out. It may hurt our reputation a little, but it'll probably hurt the developer's reputation more. So hope they crunch to get as many of those bugs out.
Not enough gamers will genuinely boycott, like with their money, a publisher that is treating them poorly. It doesn't happen. I mean, even Assassin's Creed Shadows, whatever you want to think of Ubisoft, sold okay-ish. And it wasn't a horrible game. I just don't think it was as much as it should have been. But people don't care. People don't care that it's Ubisoft. They say, oh, Assassin's Creed, I liked 1 and 2. I don't care about drama and controversy. I'm going to buy the game. People see the new EA game, they're going to do the same thing too, even with what EA does with games like FIFA, right? Most people don't care, and that's why it keeps happening. That's why we're in this situation.
That's why that happens. However, I want to do the flip side. No, sometimes longer development time doesn't lead to a better game. There are games that have had really, really, really long development times, and they still fail when they ship.
Mm-hmm.
And you may ask yourself, okay, why is that? Why does that happen?
Duke Nukem Forever, I think,
Because-
as Lazy Fangs put it, is a good example. Also, Dragon Age Veilguard was one. I mean, it's just, if you mess around with the core purpose of your game too much, you're wasting a lot of development time. If it's a AAA game, it's not like the art team on Dragon Age Veilguard was bad. But if you're constantly having to do this reiteration on the core systems or the story, then you're just wasting development time while your artists are out here making assets and making them look better. So the game ends up being pretty, but it ends up being shallow in terms of like systems or in terms of writing. And there goes a few $100 million down the drain.
This leads into the OP's other question, which was, what can't be fixed with more development time? And I think there's three categories of things.
Okay.
The first one is bad design. Now,
Yes.
keep in mind, I'm using bad in the same sense that I say bad video games, and there's a link to it below. There is no objective bad design. There are designs you don't like, and there are designs that can lead to problems, and there are designs that are really niche. But what I'm talking about is how a design could lead to a game that even additional time spent on development won't fix their issues. And I see, in this first of the 3 categories, I see 3 subcategories of what I'm going to call bad design. The first one is the design is incomplete. And it can be incomplete in a lot of different ways. It may have an incomplete story. There's a hole in the story where you're playing along and something should be explained, or there should have been something you did here and they ran out of time, so it just jumps you forward to some other mission. Or the ending feels rushed.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably played a lot of games like that, where all of a sudden the last few levels don't look as nice as those first starting levels, and you feel rushed right into some kind of end boss, and then boom, game over. Also, a sign of an incomplete design, and I've talked about this before, is if it's possible for you to make a player build that can finish the game. Maybe somewhere along the line you have to have a decent lockpick, or you have to have a decent speech skill, or your combat better be a certain amount, or you're not going to withstand overland travel.
That can be dangerous. I mean, because that's just locking player progression, which is not what you want in an RPG game where you have like builds and such, right? That yeah, that can be a big problem. I know that there are some RPG games like that where like sometimes like the start of the game is so rough that if you don't have points in certain things, you can't get past it. I know that like for me, Underrail was had a few of those problems where it just felt like to get out of the starting area, you needed to have some skills at a baseline. So you make your build at the start of the game thinking, okay, I'm gonna play like this, but then the game doesn't allow you to play like that, and so you get frustrated because you can't even get through the start of the game. The longer you're working it, the more out of date it becomes, the less money you have, the more chance it'll get shafted in one way or another. That too. That too. I think that's why stylized games are going to. I mean, that's why they stand the test of time. Even a game like Oblivion, in many ways, stands the test of time better than some game that tried to be at the height of its graphical detail, or like Minecraft.
Games like this I consider to be incomplete designs. And then finally, there may be unbalanced skills in the design.
Yeah.
And by unbalanced, I don't mean that, well, it's better to take these than this. I mean so unbalanced that you can't finish unless you have one or two of those skills that are really good. Or if you only take the really bad skills, again, you can't finish. So it's kind of related to the player build one, but it's specific to skills. They haven't gone through all their quest paths and made sure that people with varying kinds of skills can get through them.
I would add on too with this that I think that there are just generally high level design issues that you can create, which is why again anybody can think that they can write high level game design, right? Like it would be cool if the player could do this and this. But if you don't think about how that cohesion is going to work as you trickle down into low level, then you run the risk that your low level cohesion between systems is very poor. Or there's like a massive design hole where you didn't think that if you allowed the player to do X, but by doing X, they completely break the game. But you can't remove X because it completely ruins that system. That you'd have to redesign the system. So this is, in my opinion, a design hole that needs to be fixed. And it's all the way from it, it stems from the high level. So you have to do a complete rewrite of that system if you can't patch it down at low level, and that can waste a lot of time. But if you don't find that, of course, that can lead to a game having massive problems. Hey, Lepus.
That's an incomplete game design, and that can lead to a bad sales. And if you don't recognize that your game design is incomplete, all the development time in the world isn't going to help you.
Yeah, I mean, there are some times where if you have those high level problems, like a good example, or maybe you just misinterpreted what the player base would want, there's some things where it's just like, in order to fix this, we would have to rewrite the game from scratch. That cannot happen because we didn't sell enough to even rework this system or even two systems. So it's just it's fucked. Like we can't go back. It can't happen.
Now back up to the the other two issues with bad game design. One of them is what I call mismatched features, where you have well implemented features, but at the design level they don't fit in your game. A good example of this would be spending a lot of time to put parkour in a game that has flying.
Yep.
It's like, why would I choose to climb when I can just fly?
I do see this happening a lot with game designers who, they'll make a game that they want to be inspired by Genshin, let's say. So they feel like they have to include a glider. They have to include being able to climb cliff sides. They never stop to ask themselves, why? Like it feels like they just had a checklist for systems that should be in the game and didn't really ask themselves how this is actually going to benefit the gameplay. Because it's cool. I mean, some things can be like the cool factor can help. But I always, I always think you should be asking yourselves why. Colton Chronicles, people might say, well, why do you have fishing and farming? Did you just feel like you needed to copy this from life sim games? And it's like, well, no. They serve both a vibe and like relaxing quality, right? They're there to add to the emotion of the game and the vibe of the game, but they're also there to help you to augment your ingredient gain over time, especially when, like, with farming in the greenhouse, when you are in winter or something, right? So, everything should have a reason for why it exists and how it impacts the gameplay. But there are some things that you could, of course, remove and it wouldn't impact the gameplay too much. But doesn't have to make sure that you tailor the content around it. You can have parkour and flying, just make flying something hard to get and not very direct. Yeah, I mean, you could fix it, but I think that I think what Tim's saying is just that it's like mismatched because you wanted to make a soup, so you found the best ingredients in the world, but you never stopped to ask yourself what soup you wanted to make, and you were just kind of throwing ingredients in that were high quality, thinking, oh, high quality ingredients are going to make a good soup, even though if you're making like a potato soup or a potato and onion soup, kind of just need potatoes and onions, right? It's like potatoes, onions, maybe some carrots, maybe a couple pieces of celery. But you threw tomatoes in, you threw some like fish in, some shrimp or like it just now it doesn't have it doesn't really focus on one thing. So I feel like I'm 8 years old and I am allowed to get a soda and I go up to the soda machine and I put every single flavor of soda that exists in there and I drink it and I pretend that I like it, but really it tastes like shit. Will be your celery after fun.
So you end up with features that don't really belong in there.
Yeah.
And short of cutting them out, if you don't recognize they should be cut, all the time in the world isn't going to make these two features mash together well. Other examples may be you have crafting in a game where it makes sense that the best items are dropped or purchased. So why do you have crafting again? Or maybe you have crafting in games that doesn't even make sense. Maybe it's the far future and everything is constructed in nano factories, with tiny little components. It doesn't make sense that I could walk up to a workbench and go bam bam bam, look, I made a new laser pistol.
Yeah.
If you design your technology, so it's big and clunky, and people can go, okay, that makes sense. I can see why I can work on that big laser gun. But if it's tiny little stuff, it may just not make sense, and it causes this dissonance. Why do you even have crafting in a game like that? And then the third way,
Yeah, I mean, and I think that a lot of that can be. There's so much I could talk about here, because it goes just beyond systems that don't work well together, but also systems that don't have the variety to support the amount of time that the player is expected to do them in an average play session or an average like save game as a whole. I think that I can kind of feel that way in Schedule 1, right? Where I liked the creation, the packaging of drugs in Schedule 1, but the amount of time that you're expected to play, it becomes tedious and grindy, and then you can automate it, but then you're just like, your game turns into you sitting there making orders and restocking shelves while your minions do all the work. So you actually don't have a game to play anymore. And I think Factorio can also kind of reach that point. And it's not that these games are bad, but I think that they fail to recognize that by gamifying their gameplay loop so much and adding in progression that feels like it on the surface to players it sounds great. Great, I can automate this thing. I don't have to do it anymore. Well, why does the player want to automate it? It's because it became grindy. They were asked to do it too often, or it didn't have enough variety, and that small little mini game loop or gameplay loop for them became annoying. They can automate that out. Great. What have you replaced it with? Oh, nothing. So you have these really cool gameplay loops or mini game loops that became really annoying. So the player automates them. Now they don't have to do them, and now they have nothing to do. And you could argue that that's where the game ends, but maybe you just shouldn't have added all that automation, or you should have made it happen way later, or you should have replaced the player's loop with other things to do at like a different level, which Schedule One kind of does. The game is in early access at this point, so I'm not gonna, I'm not judging it. I'm not saying it's a bad game for it, but this is a problem that will have to be solved because I think that a game like Factorio probably has enough variety to sustain it for longer. Schedule One does not, so it's going to have to put in more variety, more different things for the player to do, or add in like even a whole new gameplay loop at some point where maybe you have to manage all of these more remotely. It's an answer that has to be solved, and it's likely that the guy knows about it, that Tyler knows about it, right? So yeah, like I said, there's a lot to talk about here, but it's also one of the reasons why there won't be any automation in Colton Chronicles. That is the gameplay loop, is making potions. So now that we know that the player can't automate it, we need to make sure that it isn't so grindy or tedious that it becomes boring. Look at Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's a good example. Smithing and potion making could very, very quickly and easily become grindy and tedious. And they make it not happen by just making sure that the gameplay percentages of those two systems are very low. So you're not doing it all the time. And if you have to do it, you do it in like sprints of a few potions or a few pieces, a few swords, and you have your fun, and then you go do something else for, 40 hours. And then you come back and you can do a little bit more of it. It works.
And then the third way I think a bad design can hurt you, no matter how much time you're given, is if you're just trend following. Basically, I've seen
yes
games that do this where while they're making it, some new feature comes out, and now they have to have that.
Yep.
Or they see that some features become no longer trendy, and now they want to remove it. The more time you give them, the more this will just happen. And then worse, if once they do ship, if they do eventually ship, it may be the case that whatever trend they decided to follow,
over.
Gamers have seen a lot of games with this already. And maybe you did it good and they're just worn out, or maybe you didn't do it as well as these other games. So gamers are like, why should I play this when I can play this?
Yeah,
so,
don't trend chase. Don't trend chase. Just be like I said. It happened with Genshin. Genshin came out. People loved the exploration, the discovery of Genshin. Everyone felt like they needed to add in gliders and wall climbing. It was it's so fucking annoying, and I hate seeing it. Or a new. You just know that. I just know. By the way, Schedule One is popular. What are people gonna do? More games where you make drugs. Power World is popular. What are people going to do? Make more games where you can pull out a gun, which is honestly still kind of funny sometimes. But people are going to trace these trends. They're going to become annoying. They're going to become overused, and then they will become dead trends. And they might be revived 10, 20 years later down the line, but it needs time to be lost again. People need to start to want it. Pretty much all the AAA industry, yeah, because they trend chase, because they see trends that work, and people who don't know anything about games say, oh, this made money, so do the things that this game did so that we can make money too, not realizing that that is not how you make money. Or like if you watch anime, isekai, what are the two like OG isekai what am I thinking, the titles? ReZero, Mushoku Tensei. Those were like the two OG ones that came out around the same time as light novels, and they kind of set the standards for how the genre should work, but they're well written. Well, I went recent because those are the ones that kind of popularized the genre, right? They were the ones that set the trend. There were definitely way more ones before that, even like Digimon, I think, was technically an isekai. But either way, those are the ones that kind of set the trend, and then now we have a million anime that are, I died as a grandfather and woke up as a lowly princess in a ecchi world where all of the men have giant dicks, right? Okay? This is exactly how they end up, and nobody wants to watch this. Nobody who is not out of jail wants to watch this, or not in jail. So, people just chase the trend. They copy the things that they think work. Have no understanding of why people like ReZero and Mushoku Tensei, or even Slime, and then they wonder why they fail and never get any sort of like popularity. It's the same thing that happens. It happens in movies. I think it happens in music. It happens everywhere. Everything with entertainment. People are trend chasing because it requires creativity. And if you don't have creativity, the one thing you do is copy.
Trend following frequently leads to games that come out and lead to gamers just going, eh.
Yep.
So that's a problem. I think there's two other non-design reasons why getting extra time won't help you. The first one is there's a couple production ways it can happen. One is if your team skill set doesn't match the game features you've designed. Let's say you want to make a combat heavy game, but you don't have really good combat designers. Or let's say you want to make a game that's supposed to be...
This is very understated, by the way.
In the dark, because it's supposed to be scary and horror, but you have really not skilled lighting individuals for the levels. So you either end up with pitch black levels or levels where like, why is this sewer lit up as bright as the sun? It's not saying they're bad game developers. It's just what they're good at isn't what you designed.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the biggest things that separates like junior designers from senior designers. That senior designers will inherently they'll know the team a bit more, or they'll understand the technical limitations or the team's limitations or the budgetary limitations, or actually all of the above, to be able to cater the design to the team that they have. Whereas junior designers are great because they think outside the box in ways that senior designers have become pigeonholed into. So oftentimes I get the best ideas or the best inspiration from junior designers, but junior designers have no foundation or anchor with which to think, what can we do and what can we not do? And that just comes with experience, right? You just need to work in game dev more often and have your ideas rejected and told, well, this is impossible because this will take this amount of time. You reframe your reference, then you get better at designing. Just experience.
You know, if you try to make a story game and you don't have any writers on staff, it's not going to be a good story game.
Yep.
That kind of thing. And then the other production issue that frequently creeps in is just bad estimates. I have a whole video on time estimation and ways that can go wrong. But basically, if people have already given you bad estimates, then if you're trying to finish up and you haven't corrected for those bad estimates, you're just going to get another round of bad estimates, and that extra time is not going to help you. Especially if you didn't recognize that the reason some of these are bad is that your features are just mismatched. So you work really hard to get one feature working, and then they complain about another one. You work really hard to get that one working right, and then they complain about the first one again because those features are at odds. You're just wasting time. You're just going in circles.
This is true.
And then
some of that's happened with Colton Chronicles, because we had to switch the game idea from like an adventure puzzle game to a more RPG and action-driven game, which is fine. I'm okay with that. But yes, a lot of those early systems, or like the world, the level, is at odds with that new design. So it does need to go back on, but I think that it would just be better to hire people who know what they're talking about and know how to design that better than me, which is why we plan to start with a combat designer, level designer, lead artist, to do all the things that I cannot do very well and would struggle to do for a long time without that support. So
the third reason, I think, third category of why extra development time won't help you is discoverability. I have a video, and I'll link it below, on discoverability and why it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. It basically is there's too many games out there, and it's hard to find yours. So giving you all the development time in the world won't necessarily make your game more discoverable, especially if
true.
The money that you spent on that extra development time came out of your marketing budget. Because that's the truth. When there's 25,000 games coming out a year, you kind of need a good marketing budget.
Yes,
you need
you do.
Some way of letting gamers know, hey, have you heard of my game? You might like it. So
sadly, this isn't the era of, World of Goo, or even to a lot of extent like Terraria and Stardew Valley, where you can just be that, shining little indie game in the darkness. You either have to get inordinately lucky or have good marketing. And you cannot bank that you're going to get lucky. You just cannot. I'm sorry, but there can be fantastic games that get made, get released. The developer thinks that they're going to make waves, and they just self-published and hope that, okay, my gameplay is good, so people must pick it up and must share it, and must talk about it. It's just not going to happen. Not going to happen. Small loan of $1,000,000 from my parents, I wish. I mean, if I had $1,000,000 to spend on marketing, I would definitely spend it well, but yeah, you just can't get by. You can't pretend. I mean, look at the guy who made Balatro. He made it for his friends. He didn't expect to sell a lot. He got lucky. But he wasn't hoping to get lucky. He was just hoping to make a game. And you'll see that with pretty much every single developer that got lucky, is that they were never banking, they were never planning to get lucky. And you won't be any different.
Like I said, all the extra game development time in the world won't help your game get discovered, because those are completely orthogonal things. So I hope that answers the question, but let me just give this recommendation to you. If this happens to you, you got your extra time, game shipped and it didn't sell, watch my video, I'll link it below, on what to do when your game doesn't sell. Because I've had to do that myself several times. So if there's one thing I'm kind of an expert on, is what steps you take after your game doesn't sell well. Anyway,
Cry in a corner and pick your substance abuse.
I hope that answered your question, T4, and you won.
Good video. Yeah, good video. It just sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not, and the better thing you can do is just try to design the right game from the start. What the fuck is this? All right, I'm gonna end the recording for that one. We'll jump over to another one because we have some more time. So thanks for watching that one on YouTube. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye bye, YouTube. Bye bye.